Hello everybody, welcome back to That Fiction Life. In today's video I have a very special guest. We have Chloe Gong, the author of These Violent Delights. First of all, Chloe, you need to tell us what this book is about.
This is a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 1920 Shanghai about two rival gangs locked in a blood feud, but when a monster rises from the river and starts wreaking havoc across the city, the rival heirs of these two gangs have to work together and find out what's killing all their people before the whole city falls.
With that in mind, as you just said, it is a Romeo and Juliet retelling. What drew you to this classic play, and how did you decide which aspects of it to adapt?
Good question, because this definitely evolved a lot. So originally it started as just a blood story, and the more I worked at the original concept, the more it seemed really similar to the Shakespearean touchstone text about blood feuds and star-crossed lovers. So I was like, I can't write this without some sort of homage to Romeo and Juliet. I realized that it needed to come back to the original Shakespearean in some way because, you know, Shakespeare's already done that, and there's no way to really write a blood feud story without acknowledging the original that kind of existed first. So I thought if I retell it, it's going to make it even more interesting by taking the idea that already exists and then putting it in a whole new lens. So then as that developed though, the more I realized I was actually trying to get to the heart of the whole, you know, love and hate, those kind of themes, rather than the actual plot itself. Once you read the book and then you compare it to the original play, you'll see that there are like very little surface level similarities. And there used to be more. The first few drafts of it used to follow the plot a lot more closely.
Roma is a really complex character, and he kind of differs from the traditional love interest. He's a little bit more careful, whereas Juliet is more of the impulsive one. And I was wondering, how did you approach characterizing him?
The funnier thing is, in a lot of the earlier drafts, Romeo and Juliet were a lot more similar. So they both had this quite abrasive, quick to react kind of personality. And Juliet has mostly stuck the same throughout all the revisions, whereas Roma is the one that sort of changed. Because the more I was writing, the more it seemed necessary to like differentiate them in some way, right? Because at the end of the day, they're supposed to be these two sides of the same coin, but they're not the same person. So a lot of the earlier versions, like I was leaning too far into the whole idea of these two are the heirs, like two parts of the city, and they're the only ones that can really understand each other. And I was leaning too much into that to make them too similar. But then I kind of realized, you know, they can be different and still be two sides of the same coin. They don't have to be the same coin. They're two sides of the same coin, right? So the more that developed, the more I was looking at like where they came from. The way that their two separate gangs are set up and the way that kind of produces a person. So the more I made Roma's position kind of unsteady and he's kind of like at outs with his father, the more it seemed like, oh, this would be interesting if he actually didn't like the violence and if he was actually quite squishy on the inside, but he's forced to be like this tough exterior to survive in this sort of like environment. Because, you know, at the end of the day, they're what their environment makes them.
I really want to know what pieces of history you found most interesting when researching the 1920s.
Honestly, all of it, because the 1920s was just such a frantic and tumultuous time. Like there was so much happening. Most of the true history was definitely like the most striking to me because while I do make up a lot, like to work with the plot I'm inventing, most of the like true history scenes that I do include, I try to make it as like historically accurate as possible. I mean, the fact that Shanghai was actually run by gangsters is fascinating to me because it's wild. Like the fact that there really was no like true law because the land was so split that they couldn't govern and apply their jurisdiction. There was just so many countries at once holding claim over it. The fact that in true history, I think it was the chief detective of like the French concession police was also the head gangster that ran most of Shanghai. A lot of these things, if I wrote it into the book, people would be like, I don't think this is quite realistic. Can you revise? And I'd be like, it's from history. So like there are some things where I just censored myself. I was like, I know that this won't translate over necessarily quite right. But then even knowing that this really did happen, it's just like,
This is one of my biggest pet peeves, I think, when authors will include things that people could have judged and say, oh, that's not realistic, that wouldn't happen, but it is.
But it is, as shown by the whole of 2020.
Which of the characters do you think would most likely want to travel to the contemporary setting?
Good question. My immediate instinct is Marshall. I feel like he would be chaotic in the contemporary setting.
This one is a fun question. If all of these characters were not in gangs, what sort of careers do you think that they would pursue?
I think Juliet would love to run a restaurant or a bar. I feel like she'd be one of those people just, scrubbing down the front desk and then yelling at people if they're not bringing, like, the dishes in.
Yes.
Oh, my dude. Maybe, like, a bookshop keeper or, like, a librarian.
I can see that.
And he'd just yell at the people who are, like, a little too loud. Be like, careful! The books! I could see him doing that. What would Marshall do?
A weapons instructor.
Maybe. One of those people who keep those, like, firing ranges, and then he...
Yes!
You know how you have to stand back when people are firing? He would just be walking around the firing.
Yes, I can see that.
Or run with him. And he'd be like, Marshall, get off the field! And he'd be like, aha! Yeah. I could see that. Yeah, exactly. Rosalind is already a dancer, so she would probably stick with that. One of those ballet coaches that everyone is afraid of. Kathleen do. She should probably be a politician, actually. Or one of those people who really like send letters in all the time to keep politicians accountable. One or the other.
This next section, we're going to have spoilers. So if you have not read the book, please depart, because you don't want to be spoiled on this book, trust me. The plot twists are so good.
We're trying to come back.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, when I read each of the spoilers, I had to close the book and think about my life. I want to know, which scene did you have to rewrite the most?
So the thing is, a lot of the scenes were rewritten multiple times. The one in book 2 used to be one big manuscript until I signed with my editor, until I signed the book contract. My editor said, I think there's a lot of development that we missed out on because we had to move so fast to get through these events. So what if we split it into 2 books? And I was like, oh my God, great idea. So the split actually kind of happens like 95%, 5%. So the original climax was book 2, and then book 1 is kind of the original, and then the ending rewritten to get the ending that we now have. The final scene definitely got refigured a lot because originally it would happen at some like smaller shop and it would be one of the final events before the ending, but now it becomes like the ending. So I had to rework it several times to make sure it was that, final bang blockbuster moment with the bang. The meeting scene between the White Flowers and the Scarlet Gang, where they try to work together, but then they don't work together, and then Elisa gets infected. That was moved a lot because of trying to find where it fit. So while it didn't get like overhauled, it was adjusted many, many times. And a lot of other scenes too that I probably can't remember which one. Those are the big 2.
Mm-hmm. The meeting scene, I think, is my favorite, apart from, of course, all the angsty scenes with Roma and Juliet, because it was just so meticulous. Everyone's kind of staring at each other. They get their guns out, and the whole thing with Marshall being the one that would shoot, masterpiece of a scene.
It's where like so many of the characters are like on page at once. So it's one of those things where I was like, okay, I have to pay a lot of attention to this now. As soon as you forget where everyone is, the scene starts falling apart because there are just so many of them present. Oh man, I've got to keep an eye on every single one of you now.
Now, we all expect a first book in a series to end in conflict, but the way that we left Roma and Juliet was extra traumatic. How do you think they're coping, especially considering their contrasting personalities in book 2?
Not well. Book 2 opens on a bit of a time jump anyway, so it'll open in January of 1927. So we've already jumped ahead a few months. So even canonically, they have to like adjust on their own for a while before they even come back into conflict with each other. Because obviously, they're going to come back into conflict with each other. We know that's going to happen. Because of the way that their personality is, I think an event like this, it forces them to adjust, right? Because now the tables are turned. Book one was Juliet being so angry. Roma betrayed me, and now I have to work with him again. Whereas Roma this whole time has always known the truth, which is why he's been a lot more forgiving. But now we've switched. Now Roma's the one who's like, how could Juliet betray me like this? But Juliet knows the truth, and she's the one that loves him now, rather than being like, oh, he doesn't love me. He's the one now who does. The tables have turned. So I think you can kind of see in book two, even though they still have the way that their personalities are originally, they've kind of had to switch shoes. So Roma feels a bit more Juliet now, and Juliet feels a bit more Roma now. It's going to be interesting to see how people react to that.
So what are you most looking forward to exploring in book two? And is there anything you can tell us?
So book two is actually all written already. It's already gone into like its final kind of edit stage. Maybe not set in stone because I still have a few more like proofreads to do. But the most exciting part of it, I think, was really pushing these characters like to that sounds really mean, but pushing the characters to their very limit. Because I feel like the fun of exploring a character is like how far they can go. It's no fun to give you a character and then just push them to 50%, right? Their maximum potential when it appears on page is so much more interesting. And I think book two gave me the room to do that because you already know them. Because book one, you had to introduce them and you had to find out who they were first to really root for them. So I feel like intro books, you have the difficulty of making the reader want to read about them first. And when the reader does want to come back for book two, you can just hit the ground running. Book two is going to be everything book one was and even more. It's going to be just more of everything. Like, it's going to be more angsty, but there'll be more romance.
Which do you think was harder to write?
Craft-wise, I think it was book two, because the follow-up in a sequel is always really hard because it's like, it's just a different kind of like working format. But I think content-wise, book one was harder because I had to figure out how to introduce everything, especially because in my editing process, I was splitting two books in half. So in terms of the story work, book one was harder, but in terms of pulling the story off, book two was harder.
Final question. This is a big spoiler, so if you're still here for some reason, bye. The plot twist about Marshall was just genius to me. It's why the video is called that this book is genius, because honestly, amazing. And I feel as though we believed it was true because we became quite content in thinking that Juliet was capable of doing this. Was this plot twist a part of your outline, or was it something that developed throughout all the different drafts?
It was definitely a developed thing that popped up later on. Originally, it was always Juliet would shoot Marshall, but sometimes in the earlier drafts, like he wouldn't, you know, pretend to be dead, or Benedict would take him out, and then Benedict would lie and say that he died. A lot of these kind of things, because in the Shakespearean play, I noticed that Mercutio never dies on page. He shouts his famous line, Benvolio takes him off stage, and Benvolio comes in and says, oh, he's dead. So in the way that I interpret canon, I've always been like, you know, he could be alive. Maybe Benvolio lied, and now they're off living happily ever after. In the earlier versions of the book, that was what happened. Benedict was the one who lied about it. But as I reworked this draft and it became the last final event, it seemed like I needed to drive conflict back into Roma and Juliet. Because while they make up, I think, like 2 chapters before that event, there's still so much unresolved that they can't just work out by talking to each other. They had to really explore the fullest extent of their like inherent anger to be in a city split by blood. And they had to be driven apart again by an event that is always inevitable when you're enemies from warring families, right? It's something that kind of came out of brainstorming, being like, well, what's the ultimate betrayal that Juliet can do to Roma? It's to take someone he loves away from him. And when Juliet, you know, shoots Marshall, it is because this whole time Roma has believed she's always been capable of it. And when they do reunite again, he's like, okay, she's still the same person she was 4 years ago, but she's not. He just really wants to believe that. And this event is, you know, the final signal that this girl is different now, but can you still love her even if she is this violent? And she is, right? Even if she saves him ultimately, she can still do it if she really wanted to.
I love this conflict between them. It drives me insane, but in a good way.
It's the pain of it. It's the good pain.
But that's satisfying to me, I think, because it just makes the whole reading experience more chaotic. Those are all of my questions. Thank you so much for coming onto my channel, Chloe.
Thank you for having me. This was very fun.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Make sure to check out Chloe on all of her social media platforms, and of course check out the book because it is brilliant. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and we will see you next time. Bye.